Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folktales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, and I am sitting here today recording another episode. I ruptured my right eardrum, and so I sound very bizarre to myself, but I'm going to assume that I sound the same on audio. Today, we are going to talk about Edgar Casey. I don't know if you've ever heard of Edgar Casey, but he is a fascinating human, or I should say was a fascinating human. And I'm just going to pose with this question. What if I told you there was a man who could diagnose illnesses, predict world events, and reveal past lives, all while he was asleep? I know, I'm telling you. This guy's crazy. I found out about him in my early 20s, and I'm so inspired by him. Edgar Casey is better known as the sleeping prophet, and he gave over 14,000 readings that continue to mystify scientists, spiritual seekers, and skeptics. Some consider him a charlatan or a doer of dark magic, whereas other people considered him to be someone who could tap into something far beyond common understanding. Who is Edgar Casey? I'm telling you, this is the kind of stuff that really gets me going. When I start learning about people who were doing really interesting psychic work, especially at a time where people were so quick to judge things as the work of the devil. So let's dive in to the story of Edgar Casey. Edgar Casey was born around the year 1877. And he was born in Kentucky in a town known as Hopkinsville. And he was raised by a devout Christian household. When Edgar was a child, he would have visions of angels and spirits, and he claimed to be able to communicate with his deceased grandfather. Yeah, creepy kid. We love a creepy kid. He struggled academically, but he had an unusual photographic memory. He could sleep on his school books and wake up knowing the material. And there were stories of Edgar falling asleep before a test and knowing all the answers after his nap, though he hadn't studied or learned any of the source material, which iconic. That's like my dream in school. Are you kidding me? His first major psychic event happened when he lost his voice due to laryngitis. He entered a self-induced trance, and he diagnosed himself, prescribing a cure that ended up working. Are you kidding me? Eventually, this led to other people seeking help from him, specifically for medical diagnoses. Despite his gifts, Casey was uncomfortable having them, mostly because he felt conflicted by his Christian beliefs. He had been raised thinking that things like trances and information coming in through, quote unquote, psychically was most likely devilish. So he decided to pray before he did his readings or his trances, and he emphasized using his abilities for good. This always just trips me up. Imagine being a young person in the late 1800s and starting to have visions and psychic diagnoses. I feel like it would be exhilarating, and I also feel like it would be really scary because, even to this day, I think about witch hunts. I think about people fearing you and coming after you. It also, I think part of why I was always interested in the story of Edgar Casey was because when I was a child, I would sometimes have visions. Most of my visions were either in my actual dreams, or I would have visions almost like memories. Like I wouldn't see them projected onto my reality, perhaps, but I would see them as if you like recall a memory in your mind. Well, actually, let me clarify this, because I had a friend once ask me, how do you remember things? How does your memory work? And no one had ever asked me that question, and I had assumed that everyone has memories in the same sense. I realized that's not true. My memories are very visual, almost like a film. I can usually remember things in great detail, like what I was wearing, like what the day looked like, where I was, and specific things. Like I can always remember my feelings, but I don't always necessarily remember things verbatim. Like sometimes I'll if I'm thinking about a moment with another person, my memory might paraphrase the conversation, or I might like remember the elements of a conversation, but I always remember my feelings the most, and the setting and my clothes. I always remember my outfit, or at least like 80% of the time. So the visions I used to have as a child were similar. They were almost like a memory. I would see things within my mind while still operating in like the, regular world. So when I learned about Edgar Casey, I felt a sense of excitement because these psychic abilities seemed to be something that were accessible to me, or that I wanted to access. And I was desperately my whole life looking for someone to teach me those things. And as time went on, I learned how to cultivate them on my own, through research, through talking to people, but also through just kind of pushing myself to try. And reading about people like Edgar Casey, it's one of my biggest inspirations. So we have to shout him out. Thank you, Edgar Casey. Okay, let's talk more about the details. What did Edgar Casey actually do? So his process would start with entering a deep trance state. So he would often lie on his couch, and he would kind of put himself into a sleep-like state, almost like a nap, a deep nap, if you will. And his wife, as he got older, was named Gertrude. So she would ask him questions while he would go into this trance. And he had a friend whose name was Al Lane, and his friend Al would transcribe his responses. Interestingly, Edgar Casey claimed that he would often not remember the things that he would say during his trances. Sometimes he would, but from what I understand, much of the time he didn't remember the things that he was saying, and his wife would write it down. And this actually reminds me of the work that Dolores Cannon did. Stay tuned. We'll have to do an episode on Dolores Cannon. But in a nutshell, Dolores Cannon was an American woman who died not long ago, and she developed a hypnosis technique which is seemingly very similar to Edgar Casey's process. She would essentially lead people in a guided meditation, similar to the ones I do here on this podcast, and she would have people go into a deep, deep, deep state of relaxation, and then she would basically interview them, or interview like their higher self. She calls it the subconscious. And these people would give detailed answers, sometimes about past lives, sometimes about future lives, sometimes about the karma of the person, all kinds of things. And afterwards, a lot of the patients she worked with wouldn't actually remember the things that they had told her. And so because of that, she would often record it on a tape recorder. But this is just, it's seeming like birds of a pepper. So Edgar Casey would do these readings with his wife and his friend, and usually they revolved around medical diagnoses. So he would sometimes do them for people that he had never even met, and he would provide them with detailed prescriptions, including things like lifestyle changes, diet changes, herbal remedies, and physical therapies. However, not just medical diagnoses, Edgar Casey would also do life readings, past life readings, and current life readings. He would interview, his wife would interview him, and he would be able to talk about other people's past lives, their soul purposes, and their karmic lessons. And fascinatingly, Edgar Casey also came forth with some prophecies. He made predictions about major world events, Earth changes, and even the future of technology. And he also would talk about philosophical and spiritual teachings. Edgar Casey would say things regarding the reincarnation, the lost civilization of Atlantis, and the nature of the human soul. What? I love this guy. I'm sorry, I'm just so fascinated in this man. I just think it's also so, I think I'm so impressed by him, because to be open about this in a time like this, you do have to be kind of fearless. Obviously, around this time, there was a huge kick in spiritualism, which was a movement where spiritual wonders were a fad. And this happened throughout Europe every few hundred years. The Renaissance is a great example. During the Renaissance of Western Europe, a lot of Europeans started being interested in things like tarot, which were called les cartes de Marseille. I do have a 2-part episode about the tarot, but as a reminder, the tarot is a card game that was designed after the Sephiroth, which is the Egyptian mysticism tree of life. Sadly, through so much colonization and destroying of ancient relics, some of the best kept Egyptian mysticism is actually in the Torah, in a piece of the Torah known as the Kabbalah, which is known as Jewish mysticism. But as a reminder, the ancient Israelites were informed by Moses, who was their first prophet. And Moses was a prince of Egypt, so he was well trained in all things Egyptian mystic. So really what I'm getting at is that during the European Renaissance, Europeans became obsessed with les cartes de Marseille, or the tarot, and they became popular. And so often nowadays, when people practice tarot, it's actually like, it's these ancient playing cards based on a spiritual concept by way of the European fad understanding of it, right? So what I'm getting at is Edgar Casey did live at a time in the late 1800s where spiritualism was on the rise. However, I do want to point out how much courage it would take to be so open about these offerings in a time where some people would be willing to slander you or condemn you and possibly hurt you, depending on where you were in a small town in Kentucky where everyone's religious. This is wild. So let's get into some meat. Allegedly, Edgar Casey was known to have cured a blind man. There was a man known as Hugh Lynn Casey who was actually Edgar Casey's own son, and he was partially blinded in an accident. Edgar did a reading for his son and prescribed treatments that restored his son's vision. Likewise, Casey would also diagnose illnesses for people that he had never met and sometimes had never even had contact with him. People who maybe lived in neighboring towns that would ask for readings but would never actually meet him in person. And without knowing any prior details, he would diagnose people and often correct mistakes that doctors had made for these patients. Fascinatingly, one of Edgar Casey's biggest focuses was on the lost civilization of Atlantis. He claimed that Atlantis was in fact a real place, and Edgar Casey gave detailed descriptions of its downfall. He predicted parts of Atlantis would rise again, which some believed happened within the discovery of the Bimini Road near the Bahamas. If you haven't seen Ancient Apocalypse, I highly recommend watching Ancient Apocalypse. I should do a recap on the pod. Bimini Road it's in the Bahamas, and it's on an island, and on the coastline, under the shallow water, they found these rocks that are very clearly put there by humans. And it looks like as if it had been a boat ramp. And according to scientists, it's basically a controversy within the scientific community, because through scientific testing, these rocks have been there for so long that some historians doubt if humans put them there simply because they have been there for so long. However, a lot of other people argue that science is flawed and our understanding of the ancient world is very minimal. So theoretically, it is very possible that humans have been inhabiting certain parts of the world much longer than we realize. And Bimini Road is one of those relics. It's a relic that kind of makes you wonder, did humans really put this here so long ago that it could have been in a civilization like Atlantis? And that's really what Ancient Apocalypse is all about. I know the title is a little misleading because it sounds like one of those crazy History Channel shows, but you have to watch it because it is narrated by a journalist named Graham Hancock. He is incredible, and he has been studying ancient cultures for seemingly his entire adult life. And he poses some really interesting questions. And really what the basis of Ancient Apocalypse is about is, what if humans have been on Earth, quote unquote, civilized? And by civilized, I just mean growing their own food, building cities and civilizations. And what if they had been doing that far longer than we imagined, and periodically throughout time, there are natural disasters that wipe out evidence of these cultures. And throughout this 2-season docuseries, Graham Hancock goes around the world and looks at specific sites where there is evidence that humans have been there hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's fascinating. Let's take a break. Hey, little Pepper. This is Annabelle here, reporting live from Pepper World HQ. If you enjoy the podcast, it would help so much if you could follow me. You could write a comment, give me 5 stars perhaps. Also, I would love to hear from you. Email in at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. I'd love to hear about your stories. I'd love to hear about suggestions. I would love to hear about any kind of weird, freaky thing that comes to your mind. Also, if you would like to support my podcast, you can follow me on Patreon. It's Patreon.com/esotericaandnonsense. I will also have a YouTube page coming at you so soon. And I also sell merch. You can look up my merch. It's in the show notes for every single episode, as well as the show notes for my show. I appreciate you so much. I made this podcast to connect with cool, freaky people like you. So thank you so much. And we're back, little baby goats. Speaking of baby goats, have you been watching Severance? I can't wait to know. I can't wait to know all the details. I'm so excited. All right, so back on track. Edgar Casey was he was diagnosing people. He was talking about Atlantis. And fascinatingly, Edgar Casey also made major predictions about the future. He predicted the 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression. Edgar Casey also foretold the rise and fall of the Third Reich, Hitler, and this was all before World War II escalated. He also spoke of shifting changes on planet Earth, including the polar shifts and climate disruptions that some link to modern climate change. Interestingly, he also mentioned advanced technologies like laser surgery long before it was invented, and he also talked about concepts resembling the internet. Most likely the internet. He talked about a global network of knowledge. So Edgar Casey was on it. Oh, sorry. What I find so fascinating about Edgar Casey, however, is his connection to the non-physical world and the spirit world. He claimed that he got all of his information from what he called the source, or the universal consciousness. Casey often claimed that the ultimate guidance in his readings came from a divine source beyond individual spirits, akin to a god, or really more of a collective consciousness. This source was described as infinite wisdom, love, and cosmic order. Casey also described angels that he would have correspondence with. He said they were sentient beings that acted as messengers and protectors for humanity. They were part of a divine hierarchy, each with specific roles, similar to ideas in Christian mysticism, the Kabbalah, and the Islamic angelology. According to Edgar Casey, angels weren't depicted as human-like with wings, but as powerful, formless intelligences that were connected to the divine laws. He also mentioned spirit guides and masters in the spirit world. He claimed that every person has spirit guides and beings who support every soul's journey across lifetimes. This does connect with a lot of indigenous American beliefs and a lot of Eastern beliefs of different parts of Asia. He said that certain guides could be advanced souls, they could be ancestors or teachers from higher dimensions. In some readings, Casey referenced masters or enlightened beings possibly connected to the Great White Brotherhood or ascended masters in Theosophy. The Great White Brotherhood, that's like a whole other thing, but this is kind of like some early America Theosophy. You can kind of, in my mind, you can tell that it's racially coded. Obviously, it is referring to a type of consciousness, but that's like a whole other bag of worms to unpack. And this is just another bookmark. We're going to do an episode on that. So, according to Edgar Casey, he had his first vision of an angel at the age of 13. He had a profound mystical experience as a child, where he encountered a radiant female figure who promised to help him fulfill his life's purpose. The vision marked the beginning of his psychic awakening. As he got older, he would again put himself into these trance states, and in one of his trances, in some of his trances, he would be shifted between different tones and speech patterns, almost suggesting that there were different entities speaking through him. This became a really common theme in different disciplines, I should say. He would speak in different voices, and it became very clear that there was different things passing through his body. His wife, Gertrude, often acted as the conductor And she, over time, learned the differences between these personalities, if you will. Edgar Casey also described visiting non-physical realities, including realms filled with light, sound, and ethereal beings. He described one area known as the Hall of Records, which was depicted as an energetic archive of souls, journeys that were maintained by spiritual record keepers. This is sounding a lot like the Akashic Library or the Akashic Realm. The Akashic Realm is known to be an energetic plane which acts as a library of information across realities. It's not a library in the same sense that we think of a library, but a library in the sense where it is a realm of archival information across universes. And it sounds like Edgar Casey went there. I want to go to there. After his years and years of doing readings, Edgar Casey claimed that the purpose of doing this kind of work was to receive angelic and spiritual guidance. He said that guidance from these masters or angelic beings was meant to help individuals evolve spiritually and align with their soul's purpose and overcome karmic patterns. He also said that there was healing to be gained from these experiences. Many of his health readings suggested that healing comes not just from physical remedies, but also through aligning yourself with divine principles. He also talked a lot about unity with God. Casey emphasized that angels and guides were intermediaries, but the ultimate goal was to have a direct connection with the divine within oneself. And this really is starting to remind me a lot of Eastern philosophy. And I do also want to remind you that Edgar Casey never referred to a God as being an individual, but really a source or an ultimate consciousness, which I do appreciate. In my opinion, I have a similar relationship with quote unquote God. I don't often use the term because I find it means so many different things to different people. But I do think of the creative force of the universe as being a source-like energy, almost like a star or perhaps even a black hole, some kind of gargantuan energetic source that pulses energy out of itself. And we're just riding that wave. We're in a little tributary of this river, and we're just riding the wave, baby. So I'm going to tell you some fun and interesting Edgar Casey I'm going to paraphrase some of his ideas. So, obviously, one of his biggest things that he talked about were these messengers or these angelic beings. He describes them as being from the divine. He emphasized that everyone is never truly alone. Angels walk beside us. They are guiding us through with our intuition and with real world synchronicities. He also discusses guardian angels. He indicates that each soul has protective beings assigned to them throughout their life. He also mentions encounters with what he calls beings of light. These are beings that exist beyond the earthly plane, assisting in humanity's evolution. He also teaches people a lot about meditation and prayer and what that can do to transform one's life. Casey claimed that regular spiritual practice opens channels of perception, and specifically having the purity of intent to approach spiritual contact with humility, love, and a desire to learn. He's so nice. I really like Edgar Casey. So in his life, he founded a foundation known as the Edgar Casey Foundation. This foundation preserves his work with thousands of readings archived for study. He also made a major impact in holistic health. Many of his health remedies and dietary suggestions are echoed in today's holistic and integrative medicine. He also inspired countless spiritual seekers, blending Christianity with metaphysical concepts such as reincarnation and energy healing. He also drew parallels to how his methods relate to contemporary psychic practices. Yeah, honestly, we love Edgar Casey. For this time period, this really is groundbreaking work, and I'm so inspired by him. I have started to have more psychic experiences this year that eventually started happening on accident, but I started cultivating it with intention. And it started, I actually think I talk about this quite a bit in an episode I have where I talk about my story. But in a nutshell, I started really focusing on like an ancestral inheritance that seemed something like a curse or an entity possession. And so I started focusing really deeply on that. I started journaling about it and trying to address this entity personally. And it resulted in something I really wasn't expecting, which was to have like almost a therapy session with this entity. And since I've done that, I have started having more experiences where I have been getting visions, or like when journaling, I start channeling something else, other people. And I personally feel a lot of, I feel inspired by Edgar Casey, and I also feel a sense of relief knowing that this doesn't necessarily seem to be something very odd or like crazy, that throughout history, there have been people who have had these experiences, and it seems like it's just a part of who they are. And of course, in certain cultures, those practices and skills are developed at a young age. But I'm just saying that I think what's so cool about Edgar Casey is that this seemed to happen completely on accident for him without any prior knowledge or intentional practice. And I think that is so cool. And that kind of like brings me to the question, like, what do you think? Was Edgar Casey truly tapping in to psychic powers in the Akashic records, or was he just extraordinarily intuitive? And I think that brings me to like the biggest question, which is this information accessible to everyone or just a few? In my opinion, I do think that this information is accessible to everyone. I think the only thing holding us back is our own limiting beliefs and our own personal trauma. I do know that the physical body is an instrument which you can use in many different ways. And specifically with any kind of trauma, it ends up living in the physical body, and it can block your body from all kinds of transmission. You can think of it, I almost think of my body as like a radio, I feel this is crazy. What's the word when you have the thing sticking out of your radio or your boombox? Oh my God, wow, we don't have those anymore, and I'm starting to feel so old. You know what I'm talking about? Like radio transmitters. I have to Google it. This is driving me crazy. An antenna, duh. Okay, sorry. It's just so sad. Sometimes I really do get tripped up because I don't feel that old. But I am 30, and we don't really have radios as much anymore. We don't have we're not adjusting our radio antenna like we used to. But what I was getting at is I think of the body as an antenna, And when there's trauma within you of any kind, it basically is like a jam in the antenna or like a kink in the antenna. And so I do think that what Edgar Casey was doing is accessible to everyone. And I think the only thing keeping us from that full potential is being able to work through and release pre-existing trauma, and then also the time to cultivate these skills. Because although these things started happening to Edgar Casey accidentally, he did spend years working on this skill. He would put himself in these trances and work with his wife and friend. And perhaps if he had never done that, his skills wouldn't have gone anywhere and we may have never heard of him. So I would love to invite you to try out some of these skills, perhaps through meditation, perhaps through journaling. What I've noticed works really well for me is when I journal in the morning, it really helps me get my thoughts out because I just think so much. And since I've started journaling, I've noticed how I don't really finish a lot of my thoughts. Like my thoughts are almost like a tornado and there's just like a million thoughts happening, but they're all floating. So when I have the opportunity to write, it kind of helps me stay on one thought and I can finish it and then like entertain another one. So often in the mornings I'll write, and I've had a lot of success through automatic writing, which is quite simply like being very specific, writing a question. Maybe the question is to a past life version of you. Maybe it's to your higher self. Maybe it's to God. But you can write questions out and allow yourself to like just start writing automatically responses. And it is really interesting what starts happening. This is like a known way to channel. But another way could be through guided meditations. I have quite a few on my podcast, but you can also go on YouTube and find them. But why not? Let's see, like, what if we all spent 30 minutes a day trying to connect with our psychic abilities? I really think that we all could. And I like to imagine what the world would look like if every single person spent 30 minutes a day working on their psychic abilities for the sake of kindness and like bettering the world. And that's really something I've been focusing on, obviously, because humanity can be so scary at times, and it's just so disappointing to see so many human beings exploit each other and hurt each other and engage in genocides and war and class oppression and polluting earth. And I just keep trying to remind myself, I personally can't change the entire world. I really can actually only change myself. And I want to invite all of us to really do that. Like, what if we all dedicated time to becoming the best version of ourselves? What if all of us really did take the time to work on our psychic abilities, work on our intuitive abilities, work on our ability to like heal our own bodies? What impact would that have on the world? I'm only one human, but what if 5 billion of us did that? What if 8 billion of us did that? Like, if sometimes it feels so insignificant, your effect on the world, but if we all take ownership over ourselves, the effects are monumental. So that's just a little something to leave you with. I'm really inspired by Edgar Casey. If you want to do a deeper dive, I highly recommend going online, do your own rabbit hole. This guy's super interesting. And if you're ever interested in learning more about receiving a psychic reading from me, you can email in at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. I appreciate you so much for listening. I hope that you're taking really good care of yourself, and happy Year of the Snake. Over and out.